In this tutorial, I'll design for a smartwatch and demonstrate some voice user interaction, some speech playback, as well as some Lottie animation in service of a smartwatch application. Of course, we'll start by having a smartwatch-sized artboard, and you can always turn to your artboard tool to get that. Scroll down to where some of the different watch sizes are. These are for iWatches specifically, and you can choose one of those artboards in order to create it. Of course, I've already done that here, so I'm going to delete the second one for now and work on my first artboard. I'm going to set a background color for that artboard to make it dark, like the sort of watch would be, and the watch itself will have a bevel, so you can design edge to edge within your artboard, but you have to consider that the watch also has a rounded corner. So what I'm going to do is create a shape that will be a rectangular shape at the size of our artboard. I'm going to round the corners of that off to match the sort of beveling of the iWatch. And so the amount of rounded corner that I've found sort of works is about 23. That seems to match about what you would see on the watch. And so I'm going to go ahead and put that, take off the border that's a part of that, and determine what the background color of my watch should be. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I'm going to be kind of in this purple space, let's say a little bit dark, and I will be satisfied with that. I don't want to actually select that background anymore. I don't want to accidentally select it, so I'm going to lock that and move on to create some of my other artwork. We are working with a watch, so you certainly want to think about the context of use for that watch. One of the things, obviously, a watch might do is tell the time, so I might put in a couple fields for time in here just to kind of simulate the smartwatch. But the other thing that I mean by context of use is thinking about how people use their watch, right? And they might be outside, so it might have glare and reflection. They might not turn the way that they'd angle to look at the watch might not be perfectly straight on. And it speaks to having content that's going to be larger, very easy to see, limiting the number of menu options, maybe having some high contrast elements that really accommodate the context of use for the watch itself. So I'm just going to simulate a couple elements here related to the smartwatch. Maybe I want to say what time it is. I'm going to say that this is AM, and I'm going to make that a lot smaller. And so we'll have something that maybe tells us the time. There we go. And then I want something that would cue a voice user interaction. And so I'm going to have something touchable in this case that would listen for voice user interaction. So I'm going to start by just creating a kind of icon that you could touch where that might be. I think I'll have that with a white border but a kind of different fill, maybe kind of a lighter color fill here for that. And I'll choose to have a little thicker border. All right, and so inside of that, I think I'll go ahead and put an icon for, for a microphone or something like that that suggests what that does. I've turned often to my plugins for such icons. There's a great one called Auto Icon that would allow you to search for a lot of the free icons that are on the web. You're able to filter out for just the free icons that are available. And so I'm going to go ahead and search for a mic inside of those free icons. And if there was a particular style here that I like, I could add that in to my environment. So maybe I like this microphone style right here. I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop that in. I'm going to set that to being white, and I'm going to position it within my icon here, maybe scale that up a little bit. I'm going to sort of hold down Alt while I do that so that it's scaled from the center. And if I like this, I could kind of arrange these elements together with some of my arrangement tools to make sure that they're kind of centering. And what I might do is group that, Control G, in order to just make a group out of that particular thing. I also might group the time here into a single group, Control G. So if we're looking at our elements, we've got two different groups here. We've got our mic group and we've got the time group. That might make this just a little bit easier. So my theory here is that when I touch this microphone, it's going to listen for some voice user interactions and then ultimately do something. So I want to make the transition to that sort of listening screen. What I'm going to do is duplicate this artboard a couple times. I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key while I drag this, and I'll make a couple other versions of this artboard. And in this other version, I'm going to get rid of the time altogether, but I'm going to have a transition version here. And in the transition version, I want this time to basically move off screen as well as the mic to basically move off screen. I'm going to also set those to have no opacity. And so when I transition to this screen, those, if I auto animate, those would move up and move down respectively, giving me kind of a clean screen. And that's going to transition to the sort of listening screen that I want. I might have some text that's a part of that as well. What I could do is have some listening text, for example, that might be a part of it. So I'm going to say listening, and I'll put that text onto the screen, maybe in the center. I'll duplicate that so that it's across my two artboards here. And maybe what I do is have it faded out, and we'll allow that to fade in into our next artboard. All right, so I do want to make sure that this is more or less working, and so let's go ahead and wire these ones up. I'm going to go to my prototype mode, select the mic, and say, hey, if I tap on that mic, so I'll click right here on the interaction, make sure the trigger is a tap trigger. When that happens, I want to auto animate to my very next artboard. The artboard that I'm going to is the second one there, so I'm going to auto animate to that. I might want to set an ease amount here and decide how fast that transition is going to happen. I'm going to slow it down just a little bit, let it ease out as far as that transition. And as soon as I'm at this other artboard, I want to progress immediately to the next one. So once the animation is done, I want to progress to the listening screen. So to do that, I'm going to wire this artboard up to go to the very next one. But the interaction I want in this case is time with 0 delay. Then we'll auto animate to the next artboard itself, and so we can progress one to the next. Let's see what that looks like. I'll go ahead and hit play here. When I tap, we should animate away, and the listening screen should come up in that case. All right, so that's exactly what I want. Let's go ahead and keep going with this. The one thing that happens when we go to the listening screen is I'd like a couple things to happen. One, it'd be nice to have some kind of animation that indicates a current listening state, like that the watch is active in listening, other than just the word. I might have some animation there. I might also give a little bit of speech playback, some voice interaction, in that if you're using your voice to go somewhere, ultimately you might want some voice in return, right? Just like you would have if you were using an Amazon Echo or a Google Assistant of some kind. It will talk back to you. And so we might want the watch to do that as well. And we can prototype all of those things here in XD. Let's go ahead and look at how we might do that. So one way that I can achieve some animation inside of XD is through the use of Lottie and Lottie files. And there's a plugin for that. I'm going to go over to my plugins. I've got a Lottie plugin already set up right here. You got to log in order to do that. But I could search for different kind of voice interactions, for example. I might search for voice and see what I'm getting. I'm getting some speakers, some different types of animation. And if I find one I like, such as this VUI animation, I could drag and drop that into my environment. And I might want to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this into the environment. I'll go back to my just my layers and stuff. And what I'm going to do with that Lottie animation is make sure that it sort of sits inside of my artboard. So I'm going to scale that down. We'll take that, and I'm going to go back to the design mode in order to scale it. We'll scale that down and drop that into the listening environment to give a little bit of playback to show that this is working. If we take a look at our Lottie animation, you'll see that it has a little play in the corner indicating that it is an animation. And it also has it's wired up to play automatically. If you don't want that, you could set it to not necessarily play automatically. You could have it play on tap. But if we were going to take a look at the prototype now and launch that back out, you'll see that once we progress to our final screen, we've got that animation and it is automatically playing. And so that's great. That's what I wanted, was it to listen. But you'll notice that the animation does stop at the end of its playback. One thing that I might want to do in the prototype mode here is make sure that at the end of playback, it does not stop. So what I'm going to do, it has an automatic feature that was added right when I added the animation, that with no delay, we're going to play it. So that's what's giving me the auto playback. But if I hit on the plus again, what I could do is have a different trigger for end of playback and what happens once it's done playing. In this particular case, at the end of the playback, what I actually wanted to do is go back to Lottie playback as the action and tell it to play again. And therefore, it will loop on itself and play over and over again. So that's one thing I could do with this, so that the animation itself doesn't freeze. What I might also do with this is add another interaction here that's going to be based on time. And the interaction that I want is actually a speech playback interaction. And you could also record your own audio and play that back. So instead of using the voices that are built into XD, you'll see that there's some different voices already in XD. I'm going to use that default one. But I might want this to say something back, such as, okay, I'm listening. And so that we give some audio feedback to the user that sure enough, it is interacting and listening to what you're doing. And so we could have that interactive voice feedback. And once we get to this screen, it should trigger that particular feedback. Let's go ahead and test out these interactions. And we can go ahead and hit play. Once I tap the sort of mic icon, we'll transition to the listening screen.
Okay, I'm listening.
And we prompted the voice playback. I don't know if you could hear that, but the computer said, okay, I'm listening. And so that's what we want, is something listening. And so now at this point, we actually have to listen for the user's voice and do something in response. So what we might need to do now is have a different artboard. And so I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate this artboard out, going to my design mode, holding down the Alt or Option key. I'm gonna duplicate this out. I'm going to take these other elements and have them go away. So what we might do is have this sort of zoom out and maybe fade out. So I'm going to take that out. I'm going to have the listening kind of fade out. Let's say I'm going to use this one as a transition artboard. And then once we get to some other content here, let's say what we wanted to do was just set an alarm or something like that. So what I might do is add some content for setting an alarm for a certain time. Let's say, set an alarm for 10:30 a.m. What I could do is have something that says that. So I'm going to say, okay, your alarm is set for 10:30 a.m. And then I'll put that into the environment here. So I want to switch my font here so that I can grab the size and break this, and I'll put that into the middle here. Maybe I want that text to be centered. And so I'll sort of pop that into the environment. And let's go ahead and have that transition to a new screen altogether, because I wanted this sort of to animate in. And so I'm going to have that maybe just down a little bit and fade it out. And then it's going to fade in. And the other elements that are on this particular artboard, if we open them up, I actually don't want the animation there anymore. It's faded out anyway. I don't want the word listening there. And so I'm going to use a little temporary transition. And once we hit this artboard, we're automatically going to progress to the next one. So let's go ahead and prototype that out. This artboard is just going to automatically progress to the next one without any time delay. So the trigger will be 0 time, but we're going to auto animate. That would animate over to this additional artboard. So I'm going to leave the rest of those settings in there. But then the other thing I wanted to do was have a voice trigger on this particular artboard while I'm listening. So what we'll do is we'll add that voice trigger. So the trigger itself here is voice, and the command that I want to listen for is to set my alarm. Let's say if we just say set my alarm, it's going to go ahead and do the trigger. And what's going to happen is we're going to go ahead and auto animate from there to the artboard 4, which I really should name my artboards, but you get the idea. We're going to animate over to that next artboard, and then that trigger is going to allow this to work. So let's test this whole thing out. I'm going to go ahead and go from the beginning here, and we'll simulate the voice interaction. We'll hit the speaker icon. We'll touch that.
Okay, I'm listening.
Now we get our Lottie animation and the speech playback. And from there, in order to actually have a voice trigger, you have to hold down your space bar and it will listen to your microphone. And I'll say set my alarm once I do that. So I'll hit the space bar, set my alarm. And then we'll progress to the next screen. We went through the intermediary screen in order to get this sort of animated transition that I wanted. Okay, so there we go. That is a little demo of doing some voice user interaction inside of XD. Hopefully you found it useful. We integrated a little bit of animation and some Lottie animation, as well as some speech playback and voice user interaction. Good luck with your own smartwatch applications and voice user interactions.